G'day friends, family, fellow patriots, Lord Stompy here in Adelaide, South Australia. Welcome. One of my regular subscribers recently commented on my channel and he said he doesn't trust me anymore. He said he believes I've been got to, whatever that means. Now, there are certainly times I wish I had been got to, because then I wouldn't be a struggling musician. I'd be a very famous musician and I'd be selling out arenas and I would live a very comfortable lifestyle. So far, that's not happened yet. I'm afraid the dark side just doesn't want me. And I'm not sure what brought this guy to come to this conclusion. He'd been a regular subscriber for a number of years and he often contributed great commentary to my comments section. So all I can conclude is that recently, in the last few months, I've really focused in my videos of attacking the foundations of the modern Western liberal democratic ideology. I've been going at this pretty hard and I have very, very good reason to do so. So, in my recent videos, I've been promoting one of my ideas that straight after World War II, European people were put through a process, a very rapid process that I called the Great Forgetting and the Great Erasure. So essentially, our traditional fundamental beliefs and values and our deep ideology of what it meant to be European was quickly erased and we very, very rapidly forgot it. And in its place, in the vacuum of our soul, there was cultivated this deep ideology that revolves around liberalism and democracy. So we replaced basically our deep ties of loyalty and brotherhood that were based around our collective European identity. We replaced the idea that family and kin and nation were the foundations of our very lives as European people. And these were our deepest ideological foundations. It was our loyalty to our European families and brothers and sisters. And this got replaced with basically the abstract values of democracy and liberalism. And modern democracy and liberalism now, it's a form of psychological cancer. It is a cult. So atheistic liberalism now is something that Western people will not only fight and die for in their own nations, but to a very large degree, all the Western military adventurism that has gone on overseas in recent years, the Gulf Wars, the Afghan invasion, the invasion of Libya, etc. One of the main reasons that we're shedding blood on foreign soils and shedding the blood of our young fighting men has always been promoted as being the West is promoting liberalism and democracy in overseas nations. We're promoting liberalism and democracy to lands that simply don't want it. I mean, this is incredible. If you went back 100 years into the past and you explained to you just basic everyday European people just going about their lives in Europe, and you said, look, in 90 years' time, right, Western people are going to be fighting these massive overseas wars. They're going to be investing trillions of dollars and all these resources, and we're going to be shedding the blood of our young men to promote the abstract values of liberalism and democracy to nations that simply they don't want to know about the values of liberalism and democracy, and they don't even want us there. So, if you went back 100 years ago and explained this to European people, they'd say, well, have you guys in the future gone crazy? Like, why would you just waste all your time, your money, your resources, and the blood of your young men, like, trying to force, like modern liberal values on ungrateful foreigners? I mean, this is like literally the insanity that we're under now. Now, I recently, it was about a year ago actually, I went to a lecture by this Australian whistleblower from, he was from the Australian SAS. He'd served time in Afghanistan. His name was McBride. I think it was Andrew McBride. He was in a lot of trouble because he'd exposed Australian war crimes in Afghanistan. And he ended up being in trouble legally because he'd released sensitive military material that he was supposedly not allowed to release to the public. And he released this to show that Australians were committing war crimes. So I went along to this guy's lecture, and one of the key things he kept pointing out in this lecture was Australia had to continue. This was when Afghanistan was still occupied, mind you. He said Australia shouldn't pull out of Afghanistan. We're right at the point where they were talking about pulling out of Afghanistan. And he said Australia shouldn't pull out. We should continue there because we had a moral duty to push freedom and democracy in Afghanistan. We had a moral duty to keep depleting our resources and shedding the blood of our young men to a nation that was trying its absolute hardest to repel us from their nation. And I was sitting there thinking, this is crazy. Australian young men should be fighting and defending the European Australian culture here in Australia. We have all these growing problems. Australians are now just sitting in the street in record numbers, just homeless, without hope. They're lost. There's nothing is coming to rescue these Australians that are now sitting in our street in record numbers. Why can't we invest all these resources and all this money in fixing our problems at home? But no, there is no longer loyalty to blood, nation and soil. The abstract values of liberalism and democracy are now more important to our military fighting men than fixing problems on the ground. They're more important than standing up for our fellow Australian brothers and sisters who are now basically homeless and starving in the street. This is incredible. I find this incredible. When this McBride character was talking about how we need to invest more in a military presence in Afghanistan to enforce liberalism and democracy upon the people there, I just was thinking, this is insanity. I seem to be the only person here in this room who completely disagrees with his ideology. Everybody else in the room was these, it was mostly boomer liberals, well-meaning boomer liberals who did care about the issue of war crimes overseas, but essentially they're all just sitting there nodding like, yeah, we've got to like spend more money on our Australian military, pushing freedom and democracy. And, things at home are now a horror show. And this has got to the point now where we're pushing these abstract values the abstract values of liberalism, freedom, and democracy have now become so entrenched in the European soul that we can't recognize basic fundamental reality as it is rolling out in front of our face. We can't even realize that demographics are our future destiny. So it's no secret anymore that European people are going to be a minority in every land that they live in. And this is going to happen very soon, within the next 15 to 40 years at most. And this is playing out before our eyes in real time. Now in England, we have Muslim mayors of London, Birmingham, Leeds, Blackburn, Sheffield, Oxford, Luton, Oldham, Rochdale. And this is happening really, really fast, right? You're not going to have a Muslim mayor of all these cities anymore, because now that the Muslims have a democratic majority in those cities, they're just going to keep voting for Muslim mayors, Muslim policies, Muslim ideology. And this is the really obvious weak point of democracy, right? As soon as you get a very large muscular mob of people like the Islamic people, then they will then use democracy to push all their own agendas, and they will use democracy as their own weapon, essentially. So European people now are so deracinated, they've become so cosmopolitan and rootless that they cannot even recognize this existential crisis that's playing out in front of their face. If you said to the average liberal European person that basically democracy and liberalism are at their core are very flawed values to be upholding as the foundational values of a system, they'd think you were crazy. Right, liberal people think I am crazy because I'm just talk common sense. I talk straightforward in the way I do. And the reason why liberal people think I'm crazy is because they don't even realize that only several generations ago, our European people were put through a process of the great forgetting and the great erasure of our European souls. And now we've replaced our fundamental European traditional values with the abstract values of liberalism and democracy. And essentially these abstract values, people will literally fight and die in overseas wars for abstract values that the rest of the world doesn't want. In fact, the rest of the world, large parts of it, quite rightly see that Western liberalism, freedom, and democracy is actually a real massive problem. And that's a major reason why they don't want it for their countries. They don't want it in their nations. That's why they'll pick up guns, knives, rocket launchers, whatever they have, and they try to repel Westerners who are pushing liberalism and democracy from their lands. Now, I have to confess, when I was a liberal, up until about 10 years ago, if you told me that freedom and democracy were essentially very, very flawed ideologies that weren't particularly healthy and that we shouldn't really be putting them on the pedestal that we do today, I would have thought, I myself would have thought this is crazy. When I was a liberal, I literally used to think, oh, well, freedom and democracy, that's everything. And it's not. It's not. You're European people. That's everything. You can have the European lands become a dictatorship, and this has happened many times in history. We've had very bad kings or very bad rulers. But the main thing is when we have these bad rulers and when we have these bad times, European people have always stuck together. And inevitably there'll come a point where the dictatorship is over, the bad time is over, and European people come out and we go back to thriving. Well, so what we're facing now, the existential crisis we're facing in the West now is a crisis unlike any we've ever faced before. And the vast majority of people aren't even psychologically prepared to deal with the existential problems that now face us. They're still clinging to these liberal values of freedom, democracy, and liberalism. And it's sort of like they're clinging to a sinking life raft, essentially, because liberalism, democracy, and freedom here in the West is failing. We're having system failure across all of our Western systems, and people just aren't getting the memo. This is why I'm hammering this home more and more. This is incredibly depressing for a guy like me. To put this into context, I have a godson. He's a very atheistic, liberal kind of guy. A real cosmopolitan, younger kind of, hey man, like everything's cool, dude. Now, I recently tried my best to have a serious grown-up talk with him, and I pointed out that the West, essentially all our Western nations, are failing. I said, look, you're 20 years younger than me. I said, you've got a long future ahead of you. I said essentially, Australia is failing, and I said every Western nation is basically failing at this point. There's not much of a future here for a young working guy like yourself. I said, look, I'm just going to give you some advice. Take it how you will. I said, you should think about, because I know my godson is basically very atheistic and liberal, and he's never going to become a right-wing nationalist like me. I said to him, look, think about moving to a different nation with a somewhat better future. I said, look at places in Southeast Asia, maybe Thailand, Malaysia. I said, look at Japan. I said, you can actually buy houses really cheap in Japan at the moment. I said, you've got a job. Learning Japanese shouldn't be too hard for a young guy like you. I said, go somewhere where the prospects in the future are going to be much better. And my God, this is my godson, he's deeply infected with the cancer of liberalism, freedom, and democracy. Right? He actually agreed with my prognosis. He said, I can see over the course of my lifetime that conditions are getting worse and worse in Australia. And I said, yeah. I said, in 10 years' time, we're going to be a third world shithole. I said, it's not going to be good. I said, it's going to be crime-ridden. There's going to be huge problems. The economy's going to crash. I said, so think about going somewhere where you can actually thrive and have a good future. And he literally said, I've actually already considered what you're telling me. He said, you're correct. And he said, I did even look to buying a house in Japan. He said, if you look at cheap houses there, you could get one for $40,000, which isn't that much money. And he said, I realised though that all these countries, essentially they have very strict drug laws. And my godson said, look, I'm a recreational drug user. He's not an addict, but he likes occasionally smoking some marijuana or taking an acid trip. Okay, so, it's essentially, he said to me, I want to be able to live in a country where I can indulge in recreational drug use and have Western freedoms, such as freedom of speech, etc. He said, so when I looked at all these other nations, I looked at their legal policies, and he said, I don't want to live in a nation where I can't recreationally use drugs and exercise freedom of speech. And essentially, he's a bit of a shit poster, right? So I said, are you kidding me? I said, you want to live in a shithole third world civilization in 10 years instead of living somewhere with a high standard of living. And I said, merely because you want to continue to have a degenerate Western lifestyle. And he just looked me in the eye and said, yeah. He said, yeah, I need my freedom. I need my democracy. He said, this is what I want from life. And I said, so you'd even live in a lawless shithole nation just so you could keep being self-indulgent? And he just nodded. He said, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is the cancerous ideology that's filled our young people's heads. I'm just illustrating an example here. I found this incredible. Like, I was just amazed that my godson actually knew the problems that are coming down the track, but no, he has to have his freedom and democracy, and his drugs and his degeneracy. That's what it's all about, you see. Our fighting men died in 2 world wars so that we could all be a bunch of degenerates, right? Our fighting men died in 2 world wars so that we can now export wars and drain our resources on overseas wars and adventurism, basically pushing liberalism, freedom, democracy, and degeneracy. Right? There's all these things go hand in hand. There's a video by one of the main architects of the Gulf Wars. He's a real bastard of a guy. His name's Tom Barnett, a real globalist. And he does a video of basically where he talks about his ideology and his strategies. He's a chief architect of the Gulf Wars, right? And he actually said that he said that the strategy of the USA when it invades nations like Iraq and all those Gulf nations, he said the first thing they do is, and this is his own words, he said the first thing they do when they invade is they hand out Xboxes and nigger gangster rap to the youth of that culture. And he said the reason is if you can get the youth of that culture to be indulging in these degenerate American culture, Xboxes and nigger rap, he said they quickly start to rebel against their traditional culture. They get this taste for essentially the decadent American lifestyle, and they rebel against their own traditions and their own people, and they decide they love this self-indulgent American culture. And this is the way they sell freedom, liberalism, and democracy overseas. They sell you degeneracy to the children, and the children pick it up and run with the cult of liberalism and democracy. So that's my basic views on this. Thanks to Tom Barnett, he validated my views of what modern liberalism and democracy is. It is this cancerous degeneracy that the deep state pushes deliberately and very, very consciously on our people and on different regions of the world as well. We waste our money and resources and the blood of our young men to basically enforce liberal Western degeneracy on the rest of the world. And this is a conscious policy that our elites are pushing. And the idea is that you can, using the ideology of modern liberalism, democracy, and freedom, is you can push this along with this package of degeneracy, like basically this this package of recreational degeneracy, and it's piggybacked with the ideas of liberalism and democracy, and you push that onto the younger generations in foreign nations, and essentially they get a hunger for it, they get a taste for it, and they rebel against their traditional culture. This is incredible, man. Like, this is why I'm going so hard against all these policies. This is why I'm going so hard pushing for European people to return to tradition. We have to relearn what it means to be European. We have to relearn what it means to be traditional. It's crucial to the survival of our people. I'm not fucking about here, man. Like, you know, if me pushing this message causes some people to think I've become some kind of agent of the state or some kind of sellout, so be it. You know, I would prefer to be speaking the truth on this subject matter than keeping silent, because from everything I can see, from all my analysis, essentially, now that our people have been put through the great forgetting and the great erasure of our souls, and essentially we've replaced our traditional European souls with the abstract values of freedom and democracy, is everything that's happened since has been the greatest calamity that's ever befallen European people in our history. And all you have to do is look around with your own eyes to see this. It's a massive problem, man. We are facing a massive existential crisis at this point in time. And I kid you not, if you guys can't see this with your own eyes for yourself, now that I've explained this, liberalism, democracy, and freedom are basically have become an albatross around the neck of the Western people now. Western people love to carry this albatross around their neck as if it's some kind of sacred thing. And really, it's this dead, smelly, rotting albatross that you need to get rid of that thing, man. You need to throw that overboard. You need to return to tradition. You mark my words. This is Lord Stompy speaking to you. Okay? So, thank you for listening. God bless you all. Take care. Deus Volt.